I just want to take just a couple of minutes to say why I think this is the right moment and a good moment to take stock of the living wage campaign and to think about where next, which is really the title of this session. In particular, I think we, in this session, will be debating and thinking about what we should make of what the Chancellor has termed the national living wage. How significant is it? Who will benefit by how much? And what does this announcement really mean for the future of the living wage campaign? And we've got an absolutely stellar bunch of people on the panel this morning to talk you through their views on this. We've got the right people to debate this, I believe. So I very much look forward to hearing from them. And it wouldn't be an RF event if we didn't have some charts to sort of panel you with. So my colleague Conor will be giving you some of the new analysis which we just put out this morning, which I think is fascinating stuff. But very briefly, just indulge me while I give you my tuppence worth on the kind of current context for this morning's discussion. The first thing I'd say is that the increase in the wage floor proposed by the government is a very big deal. There's no two ways about it. This is a very significant increase in the wage floor for the over 25s and over. Conor will show you charts and give you the detail, but by any standards, it's a significant rise. And it takes the minimum wage into uncharted territory, which we need to try and understand. But that's a very significant development. And because it's a significant development, I think there's a whole host of implementation issues which have been in no way resolved, and there are some key sectors which employ a lot of low-paid workers who are going to face some very real challenges, and that's a theme that the Resolution Foundation will be pursuing in other events throughout this autumn, is how do different sectors prepare for what's coming their way this April and after. So that's my first point, it's a big deal. Second point is, let's be clear that whatever else the George Osborne's national living wage may be, it isn't really a living wage. It's in no sense rooted in an assessment of what a household needs to earn in order to reach some sort of minimum acceptable standard of living. It's an enhanced minimum wage, that's what it is. That's not meant as a criticism, that's meant as a statement of fact. Minimum wages and living wages are different beasts. They serve different roles, they have different organising logics, they have different criteria. Just because I call my cat Rover, it doesn't make it a dog. And so we need to understand what it is and what it isn't. My third point would be that the new higher wage floor, which my organisation has sort of is in principle in support of, in no way compensates for some of the massive reductions in tax credits that we've seen announced in the budget, in this budget, sorry, in the summer budget and these prior budgets. Tax credits and the minimum wage were designed to complement each other. They're not substitutes for each other. Again, they have different purposes. So it's important, I think, to say that clearly, and we'll have a chart which will show you that the higher minimum wage basically doesn't really do much compensatory work for lots and lots of households. You're going to lose out much more from other changes. My fourth point, on a very personal point of view, is that I think that the changes in the minimum wage should in no way dishearten the living wage campaign. What people say about impersonation and flattery, I think, applies in spades in this specific issue. The campaign, in my view, should feel utterly vindicated and energised by what has been announced recently, and I hope we'll be hearing a bit more about that this morning. And let me finish by saying that this is my last event at the helm of the Resolution Foundation, and over the 5 years that I've been in post, all sorts of things have happened and fascinating changes have taken place, and some scary changes have taken place in our economy. But the living wage campaign throughout that period has grown in strength and confidence, and personally it's been a source of inspiration to me to watch it mature and to sort of make the progress it's made. And that's one of the reasons why I believe now, from a position of strength, is exactly the right time for as a kind of friend of the campaign, and someone who's sort of involved in it, to ask the really hard questions about how it guarantees that over the next 5 years it makes more progress even than it has so far. So I think it's the right time to be holding this debate. That's enough for me. You've got a busy lineup of people who know far more about it than I do. And I'm going to hand you over to Heather Stewart, who many of you know, who writes for The Guardian, is the economics editor of The Observer, and is a great writer on exactly these issues, so you're in good hands. Over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Gavin. I won't say very much because, as you say, we've got the absolute experts here, but I would just add to that kind of slightly personal note of my own, which is that I first came across the living wage campaign when I think Neil invited me along about 12 years ago, I think. I was trying to work out how long ago it was, to an evening event in Bethnal Green on a sort of cold winter evening. And it was a kind of, I didn't know what to make of it as a kind of young-ish journalist. It was it was part protest, it was part planning meeting, it was kind of part party, it was sort of vibrant, and this was a point where, long before the economic crash, where sort of neoliberal free-market orthodoxy was in its pomp, and here were people saying these rather, as it seemed at the time, subversive, almost revolutionary things about how companies should decide, how we should all decide what people should be paid. And I think if you'd said to me at that point, in that sort of chilly church hall, that 12 years or however many years later, a Tory Chancellor would be standing up and talking about introducing a national living wage, I would have not have believed you for a single moment. And Gavin's absolutely right, what George Osborne announced wasn't a living wage, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about it, but I think the politics of what's happened are pretty extraordinary. You've got a Conservative government that's systematically dismantling workers' bargaining power with the trade union bill, and yet at the same time is imposing a pay rise on the lowest paid workers from Westminster. Absolutely, before you even look towards the Labour Party, and let's not even go there, but these are very extraordinary political times. Now let's hear from some people who can, rather than personal anecdote, can give you some facts and figures and numbers and allow us to sort of think through what this all means. So we're first going to hear, I think for about 8 minutes each, I've been told, from Conor Darcy, who is a policy analyst at the Resolution Foundation, who's done a lot of the work behind the Resolution Foundation's review of the minimum wage and the future for it, which George Osborne cited in the budget. And we're also going to hear from Neil Jameson, who has been involved in the living wage campaign from the very beginning. Its official title is Executive Director of Citizens UK, which he's held for over 2 decades now. He's also the lead organiser for London Citizens, as the body behind a lot of this. So if we hear from each of them for about 8 minutes, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel, and then we'll throw it open for lots of questions and discussion. I have Conor Darcy.
Thank you very much, Heather. As Heather and Gavin mentioned, this isn't the first report that we've done on low pay or national minimum wage, so I think the main struggle we had this time was actually coming up with a new title, but Higher Ground is the title this time, so this is going to be a quick whistle-stop tour through the kind of key points. So if there is anything that I've missed out, or you don't get to ask it in the questions and answers section, please do have a look on our website, because all the information and lots of info on our fascinating methodology is all on there as well. So, very quickly, that's what I'm going to talk through, but just to make the key point again that Gavin mentioned, that today is more about who kind of benefits, how the gains are spread. We're not going to talk in great detail about the effect on employers, even though there inevitably will be some effect on employers. This policy will come with a price tag for employers. So on the 15th of September, we're going to have another event and publish a report about more of that, and we'll have David Norgrove, who's the chair of the Low Pay Commission, speaking, as well as Charlie Mayfield, so please do sign up for that again on our website. So, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we all know what we're talking about, because it's a bit of a terminology minefield at the moment. We've got the national minimum wage, which I think everyone knows. It's compulsory for everyone aged 21 and over, and it's recommended by the Low Pay Commission, the LPC, with the aim of boosting wages without harming jobs. So it's really focused on not damaging employment. Then we've got the living wage, which other speakers will talk about in a bit more detail. That's entirely voluntary, so there's not a concern about whether or not it's going to damage employment when the rate is set. It's about how much do families need to have a decent standard of living based off of the cost of living and in-work support. And then we've got this new national living wage. I know not everyone likes that title, and as Gavin said, it's maybe not entirely accurate because it's not based on the cost of living as the living wage is. I think the way maybe to see it is more of a compulsory kind of top-up or supplement to the national minimum wage for those aged 25 and over. So that's the background to all this. So before the summer budget, the expectation was that the minimum wage would start to make back more of the ground that lost during the recession when it fell in real terms. That was a sensible thing to do, and it helped again to keep employment quite high. But now the expectation was we really start to kind of push on to a new peak. And this was something, as Heather mentioned, that we looked at last year in a review led by Sir George Bain. And we kind of felt that the minimum wage and the low pay commission had done exactly what was asked of it, and been really successful. But there was probably scope for it to do a little bit more. And as part of the package of reforms, one of our main headline recommendations was that rather than aim for any, arbitrary cash figure, that we should try and get to a certain level of the bite. Just without getting too technical, the bite is the minimum wage as a percentage of the median wage. That's the kind of typical middle person. So it gives us a sense of how far the person at the bottom is away from the person at the middle and how affordable ultimately it would be. So that was something that the Chancellor picked up on when he announced the national living wage at the summer budget. That's the path that we expect to go on relative to the path of the national minimum wage, which will now just apply to people aged 21 to 24. Lots of doubt about how exactly this will develop. It depends on how earnings grow. Because of that bite link again, it depends how wages grow at the median. But from April next year, it'll be £7.20, and then it's expected to rise to about £9, over £9 by 2020. And that £9 figure is a bite of 60%, but just to clarify, it's not the same 60% as we said, it's the 60% of the median wage of everyone over 25. So basically it's a bit higher and a bit more ambitious than what we set out. So, and kind of the point that we made on that also, just to clarify, is that we were very clear that that should be kind of the upper limit, 60% figure. Looking out across other countries and what they've managed to achieve, 60% seemed feasible, but we really strongly made the point that the low pay commission needs to be at the heart of that process to make sure that it was affordable as we move towards that ambition rather than being a fixed goal. And as Gavin mentioned, even though we get to £9.35, we're still quite a long way off the living wage. So if you look at the bottom, the red bars there show us where the living wage is expected to be first in April 2016 and then in April 2020. It's about £10.30, so still quite a pound ahead of where the national living wage will be. So it's not in any sense national. It's not a real cost-based living wage. So moving on to who actually gains from the national living wage. We find pretty similar results to what the OBR did at the budget, about 6 million people set to get some pay increase by 2020. And we've broken it down into those who are currently earning less than the national living wage, and will get brought up to that level. So that's about 3.2 million people, we call them the directly affected. But then we've also got these other people who, these 2.8 million people we reckon, will see benefits of spillovers. So basically, the idea of a spillover is that rather than this applying legally to them, they don't need to have their wages increased. Employers will choose to keep some gap between the employees at the very lowest rung and those slightly higher up. So we'd expect this indirectly affected group to also gain. But obviously the size of those gains will really vary. Those directly affected will probably see an average gross gain of about £1,200, whereas it's about £240 for those indirectly affected. So who's most likely to benefit? Well, women are really in line to gain. About 3 in every 10 female workers are in line to benefit from this, as are 25 to 30-year-olds. But obviously the reason that they're going to benefit more from this is because they're more likely to be low paid in the first place. So it's a positive thing, but obviously we still need to consider how pay equality looks across the sexes. And we reckon that it'll probably slightly speed up the rate at which the gender pay gap closes over the next few years. But just to say about the average actual cash gains that ends up being added onto people's pay packets, that we actually expect it to be slightly smaller for women than men. This is because, again, it's how likely people are to work part-time, and women are much more likely to work part-time than men, so they see less basically on an annual basis. Across the country, the effects really vary. I think London is the real standout from this chart. This again is the bite, and you can see that London's bite, the green section shows where the bite is today, or in 2014 rather, with the national minimum wage, and then where it's expected to rise to by 2016 and then 2020. And we can see that compared to the rest of the country, there is a really big gap. So I think the living wage campaign, as we'll discuss, remains absolutely vital, and as we've said, it's this national living wage isn't a real living wage. But I think especially in London, it's going to be so crucial because it doesn't even kind of start to bridge that gap. Across the rest of the country, however, we can see that the effects will be a little bit bigger, and I think if we are going to be worried about potential job losses or any extra pressures on employers, it will be in those most affected regions. So that's why it's obviously really crucial to keep an eye on how things develop in those areas. But as we've seen since the introduction of national minimum wage, employers have proved to be quite adaptable. So how does that affect household incomes? That's all kind of the gross gains that we've talked about, but how much that will actually filter through into people's pockets and how much they have to actually spend as a result of this. So we've taken a look first at how the change will affect gross household incomes. So this chart basically shows from the very poorest households on the left, so the ones with the lowest income, right up to the very richest on the right. What we can see is the gains are really centred on the kind of the middle, especially the lower middle. But what some people are slightly surprised at is the very poorest don't really gain too much from this policy. But it kind of makes sense because very few people within those households are likely to be in employment. So if we're interested in boosting living standards there, what we really need to focus on is policies around unemployment or inactivity, how we can kind of boost things around there. So quite good for the middle. But then when we look at things on a net basis, we can see it's quite a large fall, especially in those lower middle bits. So again, this is obviously because, you know, as you earn more, you pay more tax, you pay more national insurance. But the thing that really affects those households in the kind of lower middle section there, and we've modelled this in 2020, is that universal credit or any other in-work support will be taken away as you earn extra money. So while the gains are quite good on a gross basis, in terms of the effect on household incomes for those in the lower half, it's not absolutely massive, but it's still obviously a big help, and about half the gains roughly will go to those in the bottom half. So it's definitely a positive step forward. But then my final slide is just again to hammer home that point that Gavin made. While it's a really positive thing, the national living wage, we can see that in the context of all the changes in the summer budget that were announced, the cuts to in-work support especially, this won't really compensate for much of the losses that households feel. So we can see on the darker bars are the change in net income as a result of the summer budget without the national living wage, and then the lighter bars are with the national living wage. So it makes some slight kind of effect, but overall it doesn't really change the overall effect and the shape of the policy and who loses. So just to sum up, the national living wage, definitely a major intervention on low pay, smaller impact on net household incomes than maybe some would expect, and it's really not a policy to help the very lowest earners or the lowest income households. But the minimum wage, however high it would go, or the national living wage, can never be a replacement for the tax and benefit system or for redistribution. We always need, as Gavin said, these to be complements rather than substitutes, and kind of the framing of the budget kind of slightly missold this policy. We need to have the two working together in tandem to make sure that households at the bottom really do see the benefit of wage increases and are incentivised to work and earn more. And then, without going into too much depth about the challenge, this is obviously, it's going to be difficult, and so in some areas it might be tougher than others. That's why it's so important to keep a focus on productivity gains, especially in those sectors that are most affected, as we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. And for the LPC to remain at the heart of this process, to be able to assess how the wage floor is increasing and the effects, because that's obviously crucial to ensure that the low earners who are meant to benefit from this policy really do. Thank you.
Thanks, Conor. Let's set things up really nicely. You want to? Sure. Okay, so we'll hear from Neil Jameson from Citizens UK next. I've forgotten to tell you, I can see people tweeting away. The hashtag is living wage if you haven't already worked that out for yourselves and to join in the conversation online. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me. Nice to be with Heather again. Thanks to Resolution for the leadership they've shown since they were started, particularly here really. I'm much less confused than I was when I came in. I hope your spirits, well, my spirits have lifted up considerably because people are thinking there is a life after the budget so far as living wage is concerned, and that's the message I hope to bring to you. But before I do, I just want to honour lots of the people in this room, frankly, who have been part of this movement. It was in 2000 that a small number of people gathered in Limehouse to talk about, from our membership, these were East London institutions, mosques and churches and so on, what can we do to help families? And it was there in 2000 that they said, we need to do something about work, because work is taking over people's lives. They can't plan ahead, they're not as generous as they used to be. There's two parents working when there used to be one. Have we got the power to be able to do what actually people have always done from civil society, which is to challenge the market and say there needs to be a different standard by which people are paid, which is a standard which allows families to spend time with each other and parents to spend time with their children, because that is the self-interest of civil society. Citizens UK is a civil society alliance, the largest in the country, made up of faith and schools and education and some trade union branches and others. We're blessed by a growing membership of people who like this idea of setting standards. Why do we leave it to government to set standards? Frankly, it was a flaw to think that the government and the market, with respect, could come together and set a wage which would suit everybody. It never quite suits families, frankly. So we're family focused. Living Wage has always been a campaign to allow parents to spend time with their children, because if that doesn't happen, we then suffer the consequences of children being a little bit out of control, not loved enough, and all that takes place as a result of that. So we're glad to be growing as an alliance. We're a multi-issue alliance. This is not our only campaign, but it's the one that we are most proud of, because we do believe, with the help of many people in this room, Trust for London, who have helped fund this campaign, Resolution Foundation, who have provided some of the information, people like Nationwide, the other 1,700 accredited living wage employers. Our patron I see is here, Paul Nicholson is here, Paul Reagan is here. I apologise for not mentioning everybody who's really got to the point of saying, yes, we can do this, why don't we do this, and we can set it ourselves, and they set an example. And we will make sure that our members are paid this voluntary wage. If you haven't got the money, you don't have to pay it. That's a big difference between the government's example, so-called national living wage, which we're calling, of course, the higher premium for over 25, the higher medium wage premium for over 25s, which is in the article it is. The other point I want to make is that the UK is delighted that Mr. Osborne has shown this courageous example. There is no way that we wish to discourage him from doing what he's done, or this government for doing what it's done. Concern, if ever, the last couple of years was that the minimum wage and the living wage, the gap would grow, and that was never the intention. We now will have, from next April, the highest minimum wage in Europe, which we should be proud of. And as Heather said, it's not exactly a dream come true for Citizens UK, because it was never our anticipation, which is sometimes the voluntary sector makes that mistake, of saying, can we push this campaign over the government and then our job is done? The issue about wages, particularly, the job is never done. You never have quite enough money for families, frankly. So this is not, we're not calling the end of the campaign. We're grateful the government has recognised the power that they have, but as Resolution has already indicated, it's not enough. It won't be enough to sustain people. It is for over 25-year-olds. What about the loss of tax credits? What about the role of under 25s and the money that they need? So we continue to raise those points, but nevertheless to applaud the Chancellor's example, to be proud of living in a country that next year will have this very high minimum wage is a good thing. But as I say, it's not the end of the campaign. It was in 1895 that the match girls began to strike in the match girls factory for not better wages, actually better conditions. It was 1896 that the Catholic workers, with some help from their organisers, began to organise the Great Dock Strike. That was for money, that was for a tanner on their wages. Living Wage campaign is part of that movement, as are the trade unions, of course, of people that organise for justice and a better stage. We are part of that network of people, and it's grown out of East London, but it's now across the whole country and other interests in other parts of the world, of course, of organised people who say, no, we will set a wage which, if we can employ and encourage employers to pay, is higher. It's a wage which families would benefit from. And we will make it voluntary. There's no appetite amongst our members to say this should be compulsory, everybody has to pay it. It's counterproductive. It's a moral choice. And we're delighted that IKEA, for instance, has now signed up. If you're thinking about Christmas, go to IKEA.